So let's now explore the testing setup we'll use in this course and talk about various alternatives that we have. As mentioned before, it all starts with our application setup, with the project itself. And when it comes to that setup, it really does not matter which kind of application it is. It could be a simple Node Express or any other Node.js framework project. But it also could be a front-end JavaScript project, either with plain JavaScript, maybe combined with a bundler or a build tool like Vite or Webpack, which is very popular. But it could also be, of course, a React or an Angular project. It really does not matter. It's any kind of JavaScript project. It could also be a TypeScript project. Whatever it is, what you'll learn in this course will apply to that kind of project. The way you write tests and the idea behind writing tests will always be the same. Now, certain types of projects that might have been created with certain tools, for example, React projects that were created with Create React App, or Angular projects that were created with the Angular CLI, such kinds of projects typically already have a full testing workflow built in, and you can dive right into writing tests. And what you will learn in this course will help you with these kinds of projects as well, because the way you write tests, and actually also the code you write, is pretty much always the same. It would have to be a very specific kind of configuration or setup that those things would change, but even then, the general idea, the approach towards testing, and the logic that goes into your tests would still be the same. But of course, you also might have a project which you're creating from scratch on your own, especially if it's a Node.js backend project, but also for some frontend projects. You might not always have a predefined testing configuration and workflow. And as mentioned on this slide before, you then need such a test runner and such an assertion library, which you add to your project setup and which you configure such that it works in your project setup. If you use something like Create React App or the Angular CLI, they already pre-install and pre-configure these kinds of tools for you. If you're doing it manually, then, well, you have to do it manually. Now, you already see on this slide that Jest seems to be a very helpful tool because it's mentioned for both the test runner and assertion library category. And indeed, Jest is a very popular tool for testing, and you can use it with all kinds of projects, as you can see on their official website. There, if you dive into the documentation, you also learn how you can get started, and it is indeed super simple. Here's a very simple example where I installed Jest into a basic Node Express application. I then just added one file with a test in it. And of course, we're going to learn what all this code is all about and how this works and why I did write this code. But with that, I can just run npm test, since I configured my package.json file appropriately, and my test is executed. Again, we're going to learn all the details of what's happening here and what this command does throughout this course. But it's super simple to get started with Jest, and that's the reason why it is quite popular. But Jest also has its disadvantages and downsides. It can be a bit slow, and especially if you have a project that uses ES modules, so that uses not CommentJS, as I'm using it here, but that uses instead those import-export statements, which you know from a lot of front-end projects especially, but which you also can use with Node.js. If you're using these ES modules, this other kind of import-export syntax, then Jest kind of supports it. It does support ECMAScript modules, but support is only experimental. And in my experience, setting it up and making it work with this other import syntax can be very annoying, and you often end up installing extra tools, and you set up an extra workflow for testing where the code gets transpiled and changed behind the scenes, which is always a bit annoying. If your main code works just like that without any extra setup, and you then need some extra configuration just to make your tests work, that's not really the idea behind testing. You don't want to test something different than you run in production, even though it's just a behind-the-scenes transpilation. But still, Jest does have its downsides, even though it's very popular. Now, you absolutely can work around those downsides, but in this course, we're going to use VTest. It's a pretty new, pretty popular already tool, which also allows you to write tests, and it is compatible with Jest syntax. It has an API that allows you to write your tests in the same way you would write them for Jest, basically. Plus some extra convenience features, which are really nice to have. And it works with ES modules out of the box. It also works with CommentJS though, so with this import syntax. And just to give you an example of how easy it is to use Jest, here's the exact same project as I showed you a couple of seconds ago with the same testing code. But now I swapped out Jest for VTest and changed the testing command. And with that done, I can still run npm test, and I still run all my tests as before. So therefore, in this course, we're going to use VTest because it's a bit faster, it has this better ES modules support, and as you can see here, the code you write in your tests is the same as you would do for Jest. So the vast majority of what you learn in this course can be applied one-to-one in the same way in a Jest project. And you get this more modern tool behind the scenes to get all the advantages of this as well. So therefore, in this course, we're going to use VTest. And just like Jest, VTest is both a test runner and an assertion library. So we don't need any other extra setup. We can just use VTest for both.